My name is Olivia Hayes. 30 years old, I had almost died from severe sepsis brought on by sheer exhaustion, the kind of breakdown you get from maniacally building a career in fintech. But the terrifying thing was not the near-death experience itself. I still clearly remember the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor in the intensive care unit that was the first sound I registered after being unconscious for nearly 3 days. While I lay there, my body fighting for survival, my family, my mother, my father, my sister, and her husband didn't spare a second to mourn or worry. They were much too busy. They used my emergency-only credit card to fly down to Cabo San Lucas, enjoying a luxurious vacation and blowing through over $30,000 of the savings I had earmarked for a new car. They had essentially turned my life-or-death crisis into a prepaid resort getaway. When I finally returned home still weak, their audacity hit a staggering new peak. There was no apology, no remorse, only entitlement. Instead, Sharon looked at me with the chilling resolve of someone who had planned this for months and declared that the home I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears was family property, and that I had an obligation to put Edward's name on the deed. They wanted everything. They wanted to strip me of the final symbol of my freedom. How confident were they? They believed they had the right. They believed I was too weak, too familial to ever cut them off. They were catastrophically wrong. I nearly died while they vacationed in Cabo with my cards. Then they claimed rights to my home until the evidence waiting in my kitchen finally silenced their confidence. Before we dive into this betrayal, tell me in the comments, what time are you watching this and from what city? If you have ever had to cut off people you love to protect yourself and your sanity, hit subscribe. This is my story. This story didn't start in the ICU. It truly began 30 years ago, woven into the very fabric of my childhood home in suburban Ohio. My role in the Hayes family was simple and brutally defined. I was the sacrificial daughter, the one who was meant to endure, to serve, and ultimately to fund the golden child, my older sister Jennifer. From the beginning, there was a glaring, unmistakable culture of favoritism. Jennifer received all the praise, the expensive ballet lessons, and the boundless affection, while I received the chores, the criticism, and the perpetual reminder that I was too sensitive or too ambitious for a girl in our family. My mother, Sharon, was the architect of this emotional violence. She operated with a singular manipulative motto: you are the younger daughter, and you must know your place. I remember vividly when I was 16, doubled over with a high fever, yet Sharon insisted I get up to refill drinks for Jennifer's friends during a party. When I protested, she simply hissed, "A little fever never killed anyone, Olivia. Jennifer needs to enjoy this. You can handle the work." That moment defined my entire relationship with them. My pain was always secondary to Jennifer's pleasure. Jennifer, meanwhile, fully embraced her role as the princess and the perpetual victim. If she failed a class, it was because I had distracted her. If she broke a family heirloom, she would fabricate a story about how I was the one who bumped her, leading to the predictable outcome: Jennifer being comforted by Sharon and me getting grounded often, without even the courtesy of an explanation. This pattern of scapegoating wasn't occasional. It was the daily liturgy of the Hayes household, ensuring that I was consistently viewed by both parents as the problematic, ungrateful child regardless of my accomplishments. Edward, my father, was the silent enabler. He wasn't overtly cruel, but his silence was a deafening betrayal. He would retreat to his study whenever a conflict erupted, leaving me alone to face Sharon's wrath or Jennifer's crocodile tears. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, Sharon's only comment was, "Well, that's nice, but Jennifer's trying to figure out her gap year." Edward just shrugged, never meeting my eye, his inaction validating the toxic atmosphere that was slowly crushing my self-esteem. The family dinner table was not a place for sharing. It was a stage for criticism directed solely at me. My career choices were always too risky, my clothes were too plain, and my future was inevitably mocked as heading toward some unstable city life. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an inevitable resource. Jennifer once joked at a Christmas dinner loud enough for everyone to hear that I was their future ATM machine, and the room erupted in laughter, not in protest. That night, I realized the full crushing weight of their contempt. They weren't just neglecting me, they were grooming me, training me to accept the role of their financial safety net, the one who would sacrifice everything so they could maintain their mediocre, entitled lives. That laughter was the final sound that solidified my decision to get out and never look back, to sever myself from the source of all that ingrained emotional suffocation. It wasn't just a desire to leave, it was a primal, desperate need to survive. Year 2010, at 18 years old, I left Ohio with $200 hidden in my shoe and a single, battered suitcase. I had been planning my escape since the age of 12. My departure was met with derision, not sadness. Sharon's parting shot, delivered with a smug, almost theatrical pity, was, "You'll be back, Olivia. The real world doesn't reward little ambitious girls. You'll come crawling back to us when you're broke." That cruel prediction fueled me more than any encouragement ever could have. I landed in a small, cramped apartment in Brooklyn, New York, a world away from the suffocating conformity of Ohio. My early 20s were a blur of constant motion. I pieced together college tuition through a combination of academic scholarships, grants, and working 3 grueling jobs, simultaneously bartending at night, data entry during the day, and tutoring on weekends. I lived on ramen and sheer spite, hoarding every single penny I earned. I treated money not as a commodity, but as a shield, a protective wall against the possibility of ever having to rely on the Hayes family again. My focus soon shifted to the burgeoning world of financial technology. I recognized early that fintech was the great equalizer, a place where meritocracy actually mattered. I worked my way up from an analyst intern to a lead strategist at a major investment firm. I had found my element, a clean, logical system that rewarded hard work and penalized emotional chaos. I had mentors who recognized my drive, not my gender or my background, and they pushed me, elevating my career trajectory far beyond what anyone in my family could have conceived. By the time I was 26, I was not just successful, I was financially bulletproof. I decided to leave the relentless pace of New York for the quieter yet still dynamic tech scene in Denver, Colorado. This move culminated in the purchase of my first property, a beautiful, sun-filled, mid-century modern home in a quiet, established neighborhood. This house wasn't just real estate, it was the physical embodiment of my hard-won freedom, the ultimate retort to Sharon's prophecy. Crucially, because I worked in finance and understood the importance of asset protection, I didn't purchase the house under my personal name. I set up a limited liability company, a legal entity known as Hayes Assets LLC, and the house was titled under this company. It was a standard, pragmatic decision to protect myself from frivolous lawsuits or professional risk. But it would later become the sharpest, most effective weapon in my arsenal against my own family. I rarely mentioned the LLC to anyone, least of all my parents, because in their eyes, complexity only invited more requests for money. Over the next few years, my income continued to grow exponentially. I accumulated a significant nest egg, carefully managed and separated into various accounts, including a high-yield savings account designated for future large purchases. This account held a liquid balance of just under $70,000, funds earned exclusively by me, never once tainted by a request or a bailout for the Hayes family. I was finally truly safe, a security I had mistaken for permanence, believing my physical distance had finally immunized me from their destructive reach. 2 years prior to the crisis, the illusion of safety began to crumble. My meticulously built wall was breached not by a sudden disaster, but by the slow, corrosive trickle of family crisis. Edward, my father, had lost his low-level management job at a struggling manufacturing plant in Ohio. Jennifer and Mark had invested their modest life savings into a failing local restaurant, and the venture had quickly imploded, leaving them bankrupt and bitter. The calls started shortly after. They weren't concerned calls, they were calculated emotional pleas, orchestrated by Sharon. She didn't ask how I was. She stated the gravity of their situation, always framing it as my responsibility. "Your father is lost, Olivia. He can't handle this." She'd lament, her voice dripping with guilt. "Jennifer's marriage is falling apart because of the stress. The only one of us who is stable is you." The emotional blackmail was relentless, a psychological warfare they had perfected over decades. The main request quickly evolved since they had nowhere else to go, and Denver's job market was supposedly better. They needed to move in just for 3 months, they promised. I was hesitant, knowing the risk, but the thought of leaving Edward and Sharon destitute and the fear of Sharon leveraging that against me forever finally chipped away at my resolve. I set strict, almost military rules about boundaries and expenses, and with a sinking heart, I allowed them to move into my spare guest wing. The 3 months stretched into 6, then 9. Jennifer, Mark, and my parents treated the house like a free resort. Jennifer, the golden child, felt she was owed my success. She constantly criticized my decor, calling my minimalist aesthetic cold and unfamiliar, while making no effort to find a job. Mark spent his days sitting on my sofa, flipping through TV channels, occasionally complaining about the lack of decent takeout in the neighborhood. They were parasites draining the atmosphere of peace I had worked so hard to cultivate. The worst part was the insidious emotional erosion. Sharon would frequently remind me, "You should be grateful we're here, Olivia. Who else would keep you company? You're 30 and still alone." This was her subtle way of attacking my independence and making me feel like my success was a flaw. The situation came to a head when Jennifer approached me, not asking but demanding an investment of $50,000 for her next big idea, a multi-level marketing scheme involving essential oils. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even myself. "Jennifer, that's a pyramid scheme, and no," I stated flatly. Her face, usually set in a mask of effortless entitlement, crumpled into a pout of pure fury. "You have all this money, Olivia. You're just selfish. You always were." Sharon immediately intervened, pulling Jennifer close and glaring at me. "See what you do, Olivia. You upset your sister. Just give her the money. What's 50,000 to someone in your position?" This was the final straw. I realized they wouldn't leave until they had extracted every last drop of financial liquidity from me. I gave them one last desperate concession, a move rooted in the misguided hope that I could still control the chaos. I told them I would not fund Jennifer's scheme, but I would provide a single low-limit credit card, a Visa, with a $5,000 limit attached to a monitored secondary account explicitly for genuine, verifiable emergencies only. I handed the card only to Edward, making him promise he would lock it away and only use it for medical or structural crises, nothing more. He gave me a weak, almost pathetic nod. I kept the high-yield savings account details completely separate and hidden, known only to me, and encrypted in my financial portfolio. I thought naively that this small concession would satisfy their hunger and buy me the peace necessary to finally force them out. I was about to find out that when dealing with emotional vampires, a small concession isn't a peace treaty. It's a taste of blood that only makes them want the jugular. I had just provided them with the key, a tangible piece of plastic, and they were already sharpening their claws, waiting for the perfect, most vulnerable moment to strike. The tension in the house was now palpable, a silent promise of impending irreversible destruction. It was a Tuesday in June when the perfect storm of my professional burnout and years of suppressed stress finally broke my body. I had been working 80-hour weeks for 3 months straight, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, neglecting every warning sign. I woke up that morning with chills so violent my teeth chattered, followed by a searing headache and nausea. I tried to dismiss it as a bad flu, but within hours I was so disoriented I couldn't stand. I barely managed to call my friend Alex, my only trusted contact in Denver, before collapsing. Alex found me semi-conscious and rushed me to St. Jude's Hospital. The diagnosis was severe sepsis, a critical condition caused by a rapidly escalating infection that had overwhelmed my system. I was immediately moved to the ICU, intubated, and placed under heavy sedation. My life was truly hanging by a thread, a fact the doctors communicated with utmost gravity. Since I was the only emergency contact listed outside of Alex, the hospital staff called the number I had designated for family notifications Sharon's cell phone. Sharon received the call detailing her daughter's life-threatening condition. The doctor explained the severity, the low chances, and the immediate need for next-of-kin decision-making. Sharon's primary, immediate, and only response was not an emotional cry or a worried inquiry about my health, but a cold, transactional question: did she mention any bank accounts or keys? The doctor, thoroughly confused, simply reiterated the gravity of the medical situation. Sharon hung up, not to call Edward or rush to the hospital, but to immediately begin a systematic search of my wing of the house, focusing not on comfort or clothes, but on financial documents. She found the emergency visa card in Edward's desk drawer, exactly where I had instructed him to keep it. She also found the subtle small notes I had made to myself regarding my separate high-yield savings account, including the secure online login hints. That afternoon, Jennifer, Mark, and Sharon held a brief, silent conference in the living room, their faces alight with a dark, predatory excitement. They weren't discussing my survival, they were calculating flights. By the next morning, less than 24 hours after I was admitted and still fighting for my life on a ventilator, Jennifer and Mark were boarding a first-class flight to Cabo San Lucas. Sharon had quickly transferred the entire contents of my high-yield savings account, $70,000, into the secondary account linked to the emergency card after exploiting the login hints she found. The emergency card was used to book a luxury beachfront villa, and the transferred savings were systematically depleted for high-end dining, deep-sea fishing excursions, personalized spa treatments, and designer shopping sprees. Edward stayed behind, tasked with maintaining the facade and ensuring the house remained secure. Alex, my true friend, visited me daily, often sitting by my bedside for hours, praying for a change in my condition. He kept the family informed, sending brief, worried texts to Sharon, who replied only with detached, dismissive messages like, "She's strong, she'll pull through, don't worry so much." The callousness was incomprehensible. While I hovered between life and death, fighting off the infection that threatened to shut down my organs, my sister was posting sun-drenched, cocktail-in-hand photos on an obscure social media account, captioning one photo, "Needed this break. Cheers to unexpected windfalls." The betrayal was not merely financial, it was a profound, soul-crushing confirmation that my existence, my literal life, meant less to them than a week of pampered escapism. 2 weeks later, I was stable enough to be taken off the ventilator and slowly, painstakingly brought back to full consciousness. The physical recovery was brutal, marked by blinding fatigue and a pervasive, aching weakness. The emotional shock, however, was worse. Alex was the one who gently broke the news, choosing his words carefully as he saw the flicker of life return to my eyes. He showed me screenshots not of news headlines or concerned messages, but Jennifer's Instagram stories showcasing Mark poolside, the turquoise waters of Cabo glistening behind them, coupled with itemized receipts from my bank that detailed the extravagant damage. The total amount spent was $68,500. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The grief bypassed the usual emotional channels and settled into a cold, hard knot of resolved fury in my chest. It was the absolute undeniable proof of what I had always suspected. To them, I was disposable, merely a means to their end. The only thing I said to Alex was, "Call the bank and report the card lost. Do not report fraud yet. And call a locksmith to change every external lock on my house. Do not tell my family." Discharged from the hospital 2 days later, I insisted on going straight home, refusing any further stay in a recovery center. The moment I walked through my front door, the air felt thick with deception and entitlement. Edward looked nervously relieved to see me, but quickly scurried away. Sharon, ever the master manipulator, rushed forward, feigning concern with a weak, theatrical hug. "Oh, my poor baby, we were so worried." She choked out a performance worthy of an Oscar. "We were practically praying for you." I bypassed her, my eyes scanning the home. My minimalist furniture was cluttered with Jennifer's cheap trinkets. Then I noticed the truly disturbing change. My prized collection of rare first edition novels, which had been neatly arranged in my home office, was gone. In their place sat Jennifer's gaudy self-help books and old college textbooks. I walked to my bedroom. My clothes had been shoved into one small corner of the closet, the rest now filled with Jennifer's overflowing wardrobe. My personal sanctuary had been completely invaded. I confronted Jennifer in the kitchen. "Where are my books?" "Jennifer," I asked, my voice dangerously level. Jennifer, back from Cabo and sporting a deep tropical tan, merely smirked. "Oh, those musty old things. I boxed them up and put them in the garage. They were cramping my style. You barely use this room anyway." Mark sauntered over, pouring himself a drink with a swagger completely indifferent to my presence. That was the moment Sharon decided to escalate the confrontation, sealing their fate. "Stop acting like a spoiled child, Olivia." Sharon snapped, her fake concern vanishing instantly. "You're making a scene right after coming home." She walked right up to me, her eyes boring into mine, and delivered the ultimate demand, the one that had been simmering since they moved in. "We've decided it's time to stabilize your father. This house needs to be in his name, or at least jointly. It's a family asset now, and Edward needs security. You will sign the deed over to Edward Hayes tomorrow morning. It's what family does. We are your blood, Olivia. You owe us this house." The sheer, breathtaking, monstrous audacity of the claim hung in the air, a declaration of war against the one person who had saved herself from them. The next morning, I called an urgent family meeting in the kitchen. Edward, Jennifer, Mark, and Sharon gathered, expecting an easy victory, perhaps a guilt-ridden capitulation. They sat smugly at my granite countertop, ready to pressure me into signing over the deed. Sharon had even brought a generic quitclaim form printed from the internet. I walked in, no longer the weak post-sepsis patient, but the fintech strategist they had always scorned. I placed a sleek industrial-grade tablet on the counter, then 2 official, crisp, legal documents. "We're not discussing the deed," I stated, my voice echoing with a calm authority that unnerved them. "We're discussing 2 things, credit card fraud and eviction." Jennifer laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Eviction from your little guest wing? Don't be ridiculous, Olivia." Mark rolled his eyes dramatically. Sharon, however, looked slightly paler. She could sense the shift in the power dynamic. I tapped the tablet screen and a video clip began to play. It was security footage from a cleverly concealed networked camera I had installed in the living room and kitchen area months ago, right before I became ill, purely because I had begun to suspect petty theft. The footage clearly showed Sharon receiving the doctor's call the moment her face hardened into avarice, followed by her systematic search. It then showed Jennifer and Mark cheering as Sharon read out the account hints, and their ecstatic high fives as they booked the first-class flights to Cabo. The clip ended with Jennifer literally dancing with the Visa card in her hand, Mark joking, "We're going to use up every last dime that selfish cow saved." The silence was crushing. Jennifer's smugness evaporated, replaced by absolute horror. Mark's jaw dropped, exposing the pure, ugly shock of being caught red-handed. Edward stared at the counter, shaking his head slowly, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Sharon, the most dangerous of them, recovered first, her face turning crimson. "That's illegal surveillance, Olivia. You can't record us," she shrieked, slamming her hand on the counter. "It's not illegal when it's recording people committing a felony inside a private residence registered to a corporate entity." I corrected, coolly retrieving the first legal document. "This is a police report filed last night detailing the identity theft and unauthorized access to funds amounting to $68,500. The evidence is now in the hands of the fraud division. Credit card fraud is a very serious matter, Sharon. You and Jennifer and Mark are liable." Then I picked up the second document. "And this," I continued, sliding the paper across the counter, "is a formal eviction notice. The home is not owned by Olivia Hayes, the person you think you can manipulate. It is owned by Hayes Assets LLC, a completely separate legal entity with zero emotional attachment to any of you. According to Colorado law, since none of you are on the lease and you have ceased to be welcome guests, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the LLC's legal team will involve the sheriff's department to remove you. No negotiations, no extensions, no more family ties. Get out of my house. Your claim to my property ends today." The eviction notice, signed and notarized, was the perfect legal counterstroke, a final, unassailable declaration of my independence forged entirely in the fire of their malicious greed. A few months after those events, my house felt strangely and wonderfully serene. The chaotic, oppressive energy that Sharon, Edward, Jennifer, and Mark had brought was finally gone, replaced by silence and the soft glow of independence. The 48 hours after I served the eviction notice were pure hell, a maelstrom of screaming threats and desperate gaslighting pleas. Sharon attempted every emotional manipulation in her arsenal. She pleaded. She cried. She accused me of being a cold-hearted murderer who wished her daughter dead. "We're your family, Olivia. You can't do this to your mother," she wailed, clutching her chest. I remained utterly unmoved. Edward, shamefaced and broken, tried to offer a pathetic compromise. "Just let Jennifer stay live. She has nowhere to go." I simply pointed to the eviction notice and repeated the name of the legal entity. "Hayes Assets LLC has made its decision. Your time is up." Jennifer and Mark, driven by their sheer panic over the fraud charges, desperately tried to pack. Jennifer made one final theatrical attempt to sabotage me, smashing one of my favorite ceramic lamps, claiming it was an accident. I calmly added the cost to the damages reported to the police. They left exactly 47 hours and 30 minutes later, scrambling into a beat-up rental truck, their last glimpse of me being a resolute woman standing alone, locking the door behind them, severing the last physical tie. The legal fallout was swift and satisfying. Because the evidence of the organized financial fraud was irrefutable, and because the amounts were substantial, Jennifer and Mark faced a serious legal reckoning. I provided all necessary documentation, but I refused to meet with them or speak to their lawyers. I sought no reconciliation. I desired only justice and peace. They were forced to declare bankruptcy, and the shadow of potential prosecution hung over them, a just and proportionate consequence for their monstrous betrayal during my near-death experience. Sharon and Edward were left scrambling to find a small temporary apartment, their golden years of being financially carried by their successful daughter utterly destroyed. I changed my phone number, established a new LLC in a different state, and put the Denver house on the market, ready for a completely fresh start. I took a sabbatical from work, finally prioritizing my health. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed of, not to escape, but to rebuild my identity away from the shadow of the Hayes name. I realized that my success was never the problem. It was their expectation of entitlement that destroyed us. If you've followed my story this far, you know the painful truth: sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who draw the most pain from your life. The value this story offers isn't in the drama, but in the brutal clarity of the lesson learned. I realized that setting a boundary is not cruel. It is self-preservation. My greatest mistake was confusing obligation with love. Family is not determined by DNA, but by mutual respect and care. When someone treats your life as a resource to be exploited, you must be ruthlessly prepared to treat them as a threat to be managed. The LLC was my legal shield, but my resolve was my true armor. Never apologize for protecting your peace, your sanity, or your bank account from those who fundamentally do not respect you. Don't be the sacrificial daughter. Be the strategist. If this story resonated with you and you are ready to put yourself first, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join a community that believes in building fences, not bridges, with toxicity. Let's heal and thrive together.